Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Henry Gallagher. This one could have been made into a film. Maybe it has. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! Things to note before I begin. I'm not well. You can probably tell. So we're doing a makeup-free video today. No, it's not Halloween. I've got coffee instead of gin. What? My apologies. But it was a real toss-up between, do I do a video? Do I not? So I'm going to apologise now for any sweating because I have a temperature, for the general state of affairs. We can but do our best. Let's dive in. On the 18th of May in 1980, in Dundee, Scotland, I'm Scottish. We are heading to a beautiful Victorian villa. It's described as a villa. And when you look at the pictures, I'll share some. Yeah, but it's gorgeous. Gorgeous. I love houses. I often look for the houses when I'm researching cases, because if it's got a nice house, it's even better. This Victorian villa stands on the junction of Perth Avenue and Rose Angle. So Rose Angle is the name of a road, it's basically got all these lovely villas on it. On a grassy area nearby, 4 medical students are having a kickabout, playing a bit of football, and accidentally one of the students kicks the ball over the railings of this beautiful Victorian villa. The ball bounces along over through the garden, down some steps, and the guy that kicked the ball there like an oaf, he had to go and retrieve it. So he follows this ball. This would be incredibly bad luck for this fella because when he gets to the ball, to retrieve the ball, like I said, it bounced down some stairs and is near the cellar window. When he gets there and he has a little peek, he notices that the cellar window is smashed. And I think fearing that his ball had caused the damage, he peered in like, oh, great, just trying to play football. And what he saw would probably haunt him forever. I can't quite describe the scene. All I know is that all of the officers and the main officer attending described it as not normal. And this guy was an officer for a very, very long time. And he just made mention in everything I read and saw about how horrific the crime scene was. When he looked in, the students saw the mutilated and bludgeoned bodies of an elderly couple. The reason I say I can't fully describe it to you is because in this case, it's almost like there was, I don't know, it frustrated me. There's not as much information as you would expect for a murder like this. Really frustratingly, not at all. So it was, I had to really hunt and dig. I've listened to podcasts and I've read lots of things and I've gone online and watched pieces of documentaries, but it's like, what's going on? Because you can find little pieces of here and there, but there's no real, and that's why it intrigued me, because normally I like cases where it's full of all of the evidence, full of description, and I can just go, whoa, this is everything I found. This one is so different to that. It's so different that it really piqued my interest, because it leaves you kind of guessing and having to use your imagination. I've gone down a rabbit hole. I want to know everything, and I can't, and it's like, oh, so frustrating. Anyway, I'll carry on. That was too much excitement for poorly Sophie. Oh, it should be illegal to sweat there. Do you know what I mean? So this poor student has come across this horrific crime scene, the victims of which are retired GP Alexander Wood and his wife, Dorothy Wood. And they were the owners and occupiers of this gorgeous Victorian mansion. I would have loved to have seen pictures of what it looked like when they lived in it and it was a lovely home, but I just couldn't find any. The investigating officer that I spoke about earlier was called Jim Cameron. I like that surname. And he was very taken back with the level of violence that was inflicted in this case. Very, very shocked, and it sounds like it traumatised the officers a bit. He would say that Dr. and Mrs. Wood were beaten and hacked, don't like that word, with a hammer a lot. It was clear quite quickly that the property had also been burgled. There was jewellery missing, things missing, it was ransacked, it was all sort of turned over. So could this have been a robbery gone wrong? I don't know, maybe, because they were found in the cellar. So it seemed like, and the window was smashed, wasn't it? It seemed like he had, or whoever, the perpetrator, had broken in and they'd heard and come down to investigate. Also, the bodies were staged, or at least one of them was staged. So Dr. Wood, his body was placed in a chair, kind of like looking out of the window. That's like out of a horror film, isn't it? Eh? So even worse for that poor medical student. Imagine that, like just face to face. Like, yeah, what's that film? Psycho. I always remember that. When she's in the window. Is she dead? Is it the mum? I don't remember. I watched it a long time. I don't like watching things like that really now. It doesn't do me good. Just focus on true crime. Hydrate. Felt like it took 10 years for that water to get to my face. The police appealed for witnesses, and it wasn't a completely rural area. There were other houses around, and a neighbour came forward to say that an odd-looking fella had knocked on her door asking for the address of the bishop. The bishop did live on Rose Angle, further down, and later on witnesses saw this odd man acting strangely in the bishop's garden. They had a pretty clear description of this man, and this is when the hunt for this stranger would begin. Little did they know that he was off skis, and he was making the journey all the way down south, Scotland, to the very bottom of England, eventually arriving in Kent, and on arrival immediately asking for the directions to the nearest church. What is going on? So this stranger is gone purely by coincidence as the officers are investigating the murder of Dr. and Mrs. Wood. A police officer, investigating officer on this case, he reads the police bulletin. I did not know what this was. It's interesting. So across the UK, there is a bulletin, like a newsletter, like a police newsletter. I don't know if it still exists. It did here. It's probably all online now, isn't it? It's probably like the intranet. You go on and read. But he happened to read this bulletin, and it was talking about somebody that had escaped from prison in Kent, Maidstone. This prisoner that escaped was Henry Gallagher. Now, the officer was familiar with that name. And this is where all of the pieces of the puzzle started to come together in his mind. 29-year-old Henry Gallagher was born and raised in Dundee. He was a troubled soul, and he hadn't had a very pleasant upbringing. I couldn't really gauge any more into what really happened, but when we go on with the story, I can suspect a few things that might have happened to him. As a lad, as a child, he was in a lot of trouble from a young age. When he was only 12 years old, he actually had to go to this sort of special school for naughty boys, and it was a bit like just having to serve a prison sentence. But he was so young he couldn't go to prison, so he went to this school. It didn't do him well. He was interested in housebreaking, burglary, theft, things like that. There was no violence recorded in his criminal history until he was 22, but there may well have been, but I couldn't find it. But this was the first case of real whoa, was when he was 22, and this was in 1972, and this is when he developed a deep disliking towards men of the clergy, priests, bishops, and that's why I say I think we can maybe imagine something that might have happened in his childhood. Normally goes hand in hand, doesn't it? But this is a strong hatred of priests and bishops. His first incidence of violence was full on in there, straight top tier, other than murder. and it was against the minister of the High Church in Dundee. He went to the minister in the guise of needing help, like wanting salvation, and then proceeded to beat this priest, nearly to death. When he had finished, he then tied him up and robbed him. A year later, Gallagher then went on to attack a priest in Stockton. It felt like his violent streak and tendencies towards men of the cloth had started. And then in 1979, he was burgling a house, not related to a priest or anything like that, just burgling a house, and which seemed like standard procedure for him, probably how he got his money or whatever, and he cut the throat of the dog, the pet dog. Horrific. So this officer that reads the police bulletin about Henry Gallagher escaping from Maidstone prison, and then this murder that takes place by a stranger that's been asking for the address of the bishop, and his brain's just whirring. So could Henry Gallagher have come back to Dundee, and his violence and rage towards priests has now exploded into this very horrific murder? This officer contacted Maidstone police and just told them that he thought they were looking for the same man, so they needed to work together. Nobody knows at this point that Gallagher is on his way back down to Kent. And this is where, if it was a movie, you'd be like, because everything is not working as quickly as it needs to. And he finds the address of a local priest, Father Edward. When he arrives at the house, he knocks on the door, and again, he's seeking salvation and, just preying on their good nature. Being a good Samaritan, the housekeeper, Maud, invites this stranger into the house. Maud is 73 years old and Father Edward is 88. So again, this is another elderly pair. Maud made a pot of tea. She laid the table with 3 cups. But before anybody got round to drinking any tea, Gallagher confessed to what had happened up in Dundee. This made Father Edward and Maud visibly terrified, I imagine, and that angered Gallagher, at which point he got the walking stick of Father Edward and proceeded to beat them both to death. The scene was later described as that of an abattoir, so very bloody, just awful. He so much rage, and again, there was no pictures or anything like that, or anything detailed, so your imagination can just run wild. It's just awful, really. Like, sometimes having fact is better, isn't it? Anyway, so this awful scene, and shockingly, Maud did not die at the scene. Father Edward did, sadly, but Maud, she died a few days later in hospital. But how she survived such a... Maybe he directed most of his rage at Father Edward because he was the priest. I'm not sure, but she did die a bit later on in hospital. Just awful. All of this is awful. And then again, he's just off. He's off skis. No one heard the incident. Oh, God, that would have been horrible to hear and witness. But he was off. And then 7 days later, he was found in York. He was asking for directions and trying to get to the vicarage there to probably carry on this horrific spree. So thankfully he was caught. I imagine they had his face and name plastered everywhere. They probably told all of the priests in the UK, watch out. And he was caught and he was arrested. He was taken to Maidstone again, so he was in Kent, and that's where they took him back to Kent. And he pleaded guilty to the murders of Maud and Father Edward. He never went back up to Dundee. He was never tried for his crimes there. He never ever... I don't even know if he discussed it or admitted to it. I don't think so. But that was, effectively, that is still an unsolved case, and he wasn't tried for it. And he didn't serve any time in prison for Edward and Father Edward and Maud. He was sentenced to go to Broadmoor Hospital indefinitely. Forever. A lot of people in Dundee were quite upset about this because they felt like justice was not served for Dr. Wood and Mrs. Wood, which I can see. He didn't He wasn't given any sort of thing. But on the other hand, a lot of people said, well, he's got a life. He will spend the rest of his life in this psychiatric hospital facility. So, there's no worse than that. He couldn't, he's got as bad as he can get. So I see both sides of that. Also, the investigating officer, Jim Cameron, he disagreed with people in Dundee that said that justice hadn't been served, because he said this Gallagher was not rehabilitatable. What? The brain cells are dying. Brain cells are dying. That Gallagher could not be rehabilitated, and therefore he was in the only place that he could be. And effectively, he would be there for the rest of his life. So he was like, job done. I tried to find out a bit about him now, but Broadmoor, I don't know why, but they will not confirm that he is still there. Right? Why? But they won't confirm that. But there are no death records for him, so he hasn't died. And basically, like the prison system, so all of the prisons in the UK, they do not have him, so he's not in a prison. And I think there's only one or two other psychiatric places, but he's basically at Broadmoor. They just won't confirm it. So if he's not there, he's at one of the other high, security facilities for psychiatric patients. But he's probably at Broadmoor. Why not just say yeah? Like everyone just be like, oh, good. Come on. A little bit of ooh, right? Because he didn't confess or what have you to the murder of Dr. and Mrs. Wood. And then, this is just something else. I don't know how or who it was, but somebody found a book called Blind Rage in a bookshop, and it was a collection of true crime, like true stories. It was produced in 1994 by Granta Publications, and the publishers revealed that it was written, this short story, 22-page story, was written by Gallagher while he was in Broadmoor. It is in Broadmoor, right? And this 22-page true crime, true story details the event, the murder of Dr. and Mrs. Wood. So just years after all of this happened, somebody just randomly found basically his confession in a bookshop. What the hell? Seriously, I should have looked at whether this has been made into a film. I'm going to do that. In this book, he outlines the murder, basically. So he did break into the window in the cellar, in the basement, and then really quickly they must have heard, and they were there. They opened the door to the cellar, and they went crazy. They were scared. She started screaming, Mrs. Wood, and Dr. Wood started hitting him with his cane. He hit him twice, and from what the book says, it just sent him into, he didn't want to hurt them, he said at first, but when he was hit a couple of times and she was pulling on his hair, and he was outnumbered, I guess, even though they were both elderly, but they were, going for it, and it made him sort of have this blind rage. And then he just goes on to say that he hit them with anything and everything that he could. And then he sort of blacked out and doesn't remember much after that. He came to see them on the floor, and they were dead and a lot of blood, and that their eyes were staring at him, and it just really freaked him out. He said about being violently sick and laughing uncontrollably, but also screaming and just, yeah. So I think this was his first murder because of the being sick and stuff like that. It was like a big reaction to what he'd done. And well, he clearly didn't mind it too much because he went on to do it again, didn't he? But in this book, he just talks about that murder. He also talks about part of his childhood, and it's odd. I never met my father, quote, I never met my father, but I would dream of him. He was my hero, my myth, my everything. Now, that would be lovely. Just going to read the next bit. My mother would tell me how he broke her arm, how he'd given her black eye after black eye, how he gambled away the housekeeping, how he sold anything for the price of a drink or a bet. He was my hero, my myth, my everything. Okay. This book, or this short story in the book, brought a bit of peace to Jim Cameron, the officer, because he said it was just comforting to know that they were right, that he was the person that had committed this crime. So it brought him a bit of peace, just knowing that, a bit of closure. Sadly, the house, number 2, Rose Angle, has just fallen into massive disrepair. It's a beautiful house, and obviously at one time it was a very happy family home. And it's a shame that that can't continue, but there's just been so many problems with it. And obviously something horrific happened there in the cellar. Maybe also in the cellar. My mum and dad have got a cellar, and I must admit, there's just something about cellars. No. I tried to convince them to turn it into a bathroom because I thought, how fancy is that? Because they live in a Victorian house, and I just thought, fancy, like a bath in the middle of the room, and even you could have like wine, like a wall of wine in the bathroom. Shut up. That is so cool. But you can make it really decadent, lush. My parents are not like really rich, and this would never have happened. But I was like, oh yeah, we could do that. My brother wanted it to be his bedroom. But after that, when I was like, yeah, that'd be so cool, I was like, I would never have a freaking bath down there. Imagine that. No. That is where people get murdered and things like that. So no. But I don't like it. I don't like going down into them. I don't think there's especially like Victorian cellars. If it was a brand new sort of house with a basement or whatever, maybe different. But this is no laughing matter. And also, we used to lock each other in there, so we're all scarred for life. I digress. This beautiful house will likely just fall into ruin because somebody bought it. I think I read that the university nearby bought the property and they were going to like house students in there, but there was this uproar, like you cannot let students live in this murder house, because it is called, people do call it the murder house. Nice. And so that was a no. And then somebody else, I believe, bought it, and they tried to turn it into a sort of restaurant, like a fancy boudoir restaurant sort of thing. Don't know if that's the right word. I think boudoir is bedroom. But that all just like they struggled with permissions and all this sort of business, and found it was just so vandalised that it was just costing them loads of money. I don't know if they still have it. I think they might still own it, but nothing has happened with it. So it's very unlikely it will be returned to its former beautiful glory and be a family home for somebody else. Likely it will be torn down when it's gone too far, and probably flats be built there or something like that, or a garage. Anyhow, that is all I have for you on today's case. I honestly would have liked to have had more. I would have liked to have found family members of the victims and seen if they'd written or said anything. It feels like, loads of stuff was like taken away from the case because there was no, it was all a bit hush-hush, like it was an embarrassment in some way, perhaps because he had escaped from a prison. So, that's not good, is it? He's escaped and now he's gone on to murder 4 people. Not fabulous. Maybe that's why. And also we are talking about the 1980s. It's not now, so it's not like, you can't really get away with stuff now, can you? It'll be everywhere. So, yeah. And there were just things like, I guess we're so used to just grisly details now. Like it's written about, like every detail you can find on lots of cases. But I feel like there's cases that I've covered in the 80s where it is like that. That's why I found it a bit frustrating. I was like, where's all the info? So if anyone does find any more information on this case, or Henry Gallagher, or the victims, let me know, because I was, even this morning I was like, come on, something else. Terrible, isn't it? But I do find it really interesting. Right, I think I've done okay. I'm slightly losing my hearing. I'm going to go inside for some paracetamol, get that down my neck, and I'm going to rest my bones, rest my head, because I feel bad. I don't think it's COVID again. I think I've just got a cold. I've been a bit run down, and now I've just got a cold. Just for fun. But yesterday, I couldn't really, my throat was so sore and so scratchy, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to do a video, and I don't like that, no. So I'm glad that I have been able to sit here and talk to you. That's made me happy. I'm going to sit in Granny's chair and cosy myself up now. Don't know about you, but I need to make a note of when I take medicine. I'm terrible. Like, I can't remember. Was it an hour ago? Was it 3? I'm annoyed because I would like some more. I have to be a detective every time I get ill and I take medicine, you see. And this is, me and Paul, I'm like, when did I take it? Was it 9? Was I having a coffee? Oh, had I had my breakfast yet? Like, how about just make a note every time? Anyway, thank you so much for joining me every week. That's why I wanted to show up, even if it is without the makeup and, not feeling my best. I want to be here for your true crime needs. I felt like I was going to burst into rap. I'll save you, or myself, the embarrassment. Anyway, I love you lots. I will see you next week for another true crime story and a glass of gin, I hope. I really hope, because water and coffee just is not the same. Not the same at all. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all next week. Bye!